What's up everyone, welcome back to Totally Exposed.
And we did a video on the channel previously, a beginner's guide to Final Cut Pro 10. And following on from that, today we're going to be exploring some more advanced topics.
Ooh, yeah, in this video we're going to look at colour grading in Final Cut Pro X. So,
awesome.
You ready?
Let's do this.
Let's do this. Right, so let's get into this then. How do I do a colour grade? What is a colour grade?
Colour grades. What is a colour grade? You shoot footage and your camera will have a colour profile associated with it. And when you've edited it all up, you can stylize the colours however you would like to stylize them. You could over accentuate the greens or make the skin tones all go funny and pink or do whatever it is that you want to do. Now, we tend to shoot a lot of the time in what's called log format. Logarithmic profiles in general are designed to allow you to shoot in a much more, well, it gives you loads more dynamic range when you're shooting.
Okay.
As a consequence, when you actually look at the footage, they're very desaturated and they're very uncontrasty.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of up to you then as an editor or a colorist to inject your own color scheme on top of that.
Okay.
So we've just made like a little tiny montage. We've dug through some archives of our clips. We've got Neil here being a pilot with a camera. So we've got we've got some footage that we can work with. So we're just going to go through quickly what we do generally in Final Cut Pro to color grade our footage, the tools that we use, how we go about it. Let's go.
Let's get into it.
So the first thing we tend to do, we want to add an adjustment layer across all of our footage. The reason for that being that any adjustments we make, we don't want to make them all to a clip.
Yeah.
And then have to go through the rigmarole of reapplying it to a clip. And then halfway through the project you go, actually I want to change it. And you've got to change it on every clip again. This is like it kind of adjusts the whole lot. So let's start off by going to the titles pane. And we'll go and get our adjustment layer, and I'll drag an adjustment layer over the whole of this clip, or our little sequence, sorry. So now we have an adjustment layer that we can use to do our color grade on. Now, as I said, this is all in log format, and you'll see the colors are quite washed out, they're quite desaturated. We're on MacBooks, you'll be on a Mac if you're using Final Cut Pro. MacBooks have got quite good screens, but you can't rely on the screen to interpret color. The screen information could be wrong, it could be calibrated incorrectly. You could be using an external monitor. So you have to start using scopes.
What?
Scopes are the most important tool that you can use when you're color grading, because you can't rely on what you're seeing or what your monitor is displaying to make decisions based on color information.
Okay.
Whereas scopes are scientific, and you can actually look at the scopes and go, right, yeah, that is a bit blue, or the white balance is off a bit here, or whatever.
Makes sense.
So at the moment we haven't got any scopes in view, but if you press Command and 7, you will bring up your scopes view, and you can configure your scopes to be whatever it is that you want by here. So you can click the view and you can say, I would like to just see, well, I've got it split to like 2 different types of scopes. And these are the 2 scopes I tend to use. So scope number 1 is the vector scope, and scope number 2 is the RGB parade.
Right, okay.
And we'll come to these more in detail as we go along. But in essence, the vector scope shows you the information of luminosity of an image and how much it goes in a given direction of its color. So you have a color wheel going around the outside here, and if the image was entirely blue or really blue, you'll see that it's all going to live out kind of over here on this side of the diagram.
Okay, makes sense.
The more blue something is, the further out it will become. The more kind of neutral it is, it will live kind of in the middle. And this is particularly helpful, I find, when it comes to dealing with skin tones, which we'll come to in a second. Secondly, we have the RGB parade. Now, this is a representation of the image from left to right. And it shows how bright or how dark the image is from left to right, and this is split by RGB. So how much of the red channel there is, how much of the green channel, and how much of the blue channel.
Okay.
So if your image is too warm, your red channel will be quite high and your blue channel will be quite low. And if your image is too cool, your blue channel will obviously be quite high and your red channel will be quite low. You can see here the representation of you in this image. So you can see this side of the image is darker where your head and the tree is than the right hand side of the image. And that's represented here by this left hand side of the image having a darker panel and the right hand side having a lighter panel. And each one of these lampposts represents a spike of white information on here. So this is the luminosity going up and down, and then you can see by looking across its breakdown of whether it's too warm or whether it's too cool, the different color channels that make it up. And there are a bunch of other scopes, but these two I think are pretty good to get you going with. So set yourself up like that if you haven't already, and we'll move on. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get our log footage into a kind of a more, well, we want it to be more contrasty, and we want it to have more color.
Okay.
And there's kind of things that exist that can help you do that quickly, called LUTs or lookup tables.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of LUTs.
Everyone's heard of LUTs. I think if you've started researching any form of color grading, you'll have heard of LUTs. There's two types of LUTs. There's technical LUTs and there's creative LUTs. Now, creative LUTs, they're the sexy LUTs. They're what kind of give you potentially like the teal and orange look.
The Hollywood look.
Yeah, or loads of like nice saturated greens, or that gives you a good kind of basis for creating a really nice creative look.
Right.
Technical LUTs, not as sexy, but required nonetheless. They transform from a color space to a standardized color space. So we're shooting in C-Log, which is Canon's version of log.
Okay.
And if you were shooting on Sony, you'd be an S-Log. So regardless of what profile you shot your footage in, you tend to want to get it all into a standardized color space.
Okay.
Which is called Rec 709. And most LUTs, creative LUTs that is, they're normally based off of the fact that you've got your footage into that color space, so that you're working. Everyone's working off the same sheet when they get going with their creative looks.
Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're filming on Canon or Sony. Rec 709 is sort of like a standard across the board.
It's a standardized color space. Right. Yeah, you can buy LUTs that take you straight from a log file all the way up. Right. But if you haven't even got log on your camera, chances are you're shooting in sort of a Rec 709 color space anyway. So this step may not apply to you. Let's start by transforming this footage into Rec 709 using a LUT. I would recommend you install MLUTs to load in your LUTs, because I think the tool's very good.
Yeah.
You get good LUT previews and stuff, and it has some good technical LUTs already built in. So you haven't got to rely on looking over on the Canon website or the Sony website to find the specific LUT for your camera if you don't want to. You can use their defaults and they're pretty good.
So is that a free plugin?
MLUT is entirely free. There'll be a link in the video description down below for how you can go and get that.
Okay, so we've got the MLUT plugin installed.
Okay, so you got it installed, and if you come over here and click on effects, you should be able to search for it and see it pop up. There it is, MLUT by Motion VFX. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to drag this onto my adjustment layer. Now within this plugin itself, you can see you have a couple of options. You can use some of their preset LUTs, which we're going to actually be doing here in this instance. You can also then load in all your custom LUTs. So when you go off and you purchase custom LUTs off of your favorite YouTubers or whoever it may be, you can load them into the software. And it will form like a nice gallery view, which we'll get to in a minute, which is actually quite quick to just click around and see what works for the project that you're actually doing at the moment. But for starters, if I click on MLUT presets, I'm going to change my drop down to go to the utility log to Rec 709. Now this is built into MLUT. So this is their collection of camera manufacturers and different ways of getting from log profile, as we said, to Rec 709. And then from Rec 709, that's when you can start going crazy.
Okay.
Now, weirdly, they have got Canon in here, but I think the ARRI log conversion gives you a better starting point.
Okay.
So we're going to have a look at ARRI and use one of theirs.
Like I said, I like how it actually updates in real time when you're clicking through these.
Absolutely. So you can compare different kind of camera manufacturers. Now, technically, like I say, we should be using Canon, and we're using C-Log 1 there, but I mean, that looks too saturated for me, I think. Like, the blues look too saturated on the camera and stuff. I think I like the roll-off of everything more here on the ARRI profile. So, as a starting basis, I think we'll go with ARRI, but this is where your creativity comes into it. So use a good utility LUT to get you to a color space that you think works for the footage that you're shooting and go from there.
Okay.
So now you can see that we've got this applied, and if I click V, you can see the transformation that's had already between the two. Even though we've had this adjustment layer which goes over the whole clip, it doesn't mean you can't then do tweaks to clips underneath it.
Yeah.
So, for example, here, I think that this looks okay. I mean, it looks a bit cool, but it was a cold day.
Yeah.
This shot, however, this does look a bit too cool. Like this is supposed to be on the 70-200 is supposed to be like a kind of a greyish, whitish lens, but that's got a real blue hue, as has your.
That's my hair.
Absolutely. This shot here, that kind of looks accurate. I think that, looking at that briefly, that looks okay. And then this final shot here, again, I think that looks really nice.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, off the bat, you could argue that there's not much more to do. That looks pretty good.
Yeah.
That shot, I think, is a bit too blue.
Yes, I agree.
So before we do color grading, we need to start doing color correction.
Okay.
And that's normally matching your shots to make sure that when you then do your colour grading, like I say, that it looks uniform.
Right, I see. Makes sense.
So that one looks cool, this one looks cool, the other one looks cool, this one looks a bit too blue. So on this one particular clip, we're going to make some changes so that we bring it more in line with everything else. And we can use our scopes to do this. If we look at this clip here, I know that visually we can tell it looks alright, but look at the scopes. All of the red, green, and the blue channels, like the shadow lines are all kind of at the same IRE value. Whereas as soon as we jump over to this next clip, you can tell that the blue's a lot more prevalent than that.
Yeah, you can really see the difference.
So what we're going to do is we're going to make our first adjustment to this. We're going to click on the clip and not the adjustment layer. And now up here, you'll see this little triangle. And the little triangle, that's your color corrections and grading sort of tab. Now here we have color wheels, which is what's set up to be my default. As soon as you click on that, it will add a tool. We have color board, color wheels, color curves, and hue saturation curves.
Okay.
And you can change in the software what you want your default color grading tool to be as soon as you click on that button in your when you go into Final Cut Pro and preferences. And then here, general color correction, color wheels.
Right, okay.
So color wheels are my preferred kind of go-to tool. So that's what I've got set up. I would say that the white balance needs changing ever so slightly just to kind of warm it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Here you can have the temperature underneath the color wheels, which is affecting the whole clip. And if I drag it all the way to the left, it's going to get cooler and cooler and cooler. And look at what it's doing to the RGB curves over there. And as I drag it to the right, it's getting warmer and warmer, and you should see that there's more information coming through on the red channels and the green channels. Now you look a little bit ill.
Yeah.
You look like you've got like liver failure. A tiny amount is probably all it needs here. I'd say maybe about there.
Yeah.
I mean, we've still got some blue information because, as I say, it's a cool day. But yeah, I think I'm happy with that. And now we can cross-reference how does your hair look? How does your skin look? How does your jacket look between the two shots? Does it match? I think it does.
It does, yeah.
You can also start looking at the exposure of your shots. So if this shot was massive, I'm going to just shut this panel for a second. If this shot was massively under or overexposed compared to any of the others, like you could argue that maybe this doesn't look as bright as this.
Yeah.
You can adjust individual clips. So I'm going to use my color wheels here to adjust this particular clip.
Right.
Now the color wheels are there's four wheels here, as you can tell. You have master, which affects the whole clip.
Okay.
And then you have shadows, highlights, and midtones. So your shadows are obviously your darker parts of the image.
Right.
Highlights are the lightest parts of the image,
Lightness.
like your little your hair there, right? And then midtones is kind of everything else in the middle. And you can start to see what parts are what by just having a play. So if I crank the shadows right up, you'll see that the brightest bits get brighter. And again, you can see this kind of represented on the parade here. You can double click on these at any time to fully reset, or you can click the little reset button down here. The highlights will make the lightest bits lighter. So let's look at this lens. That should get really bright, but it shouldn't affect much of the jacket, which is correct. And then the midtones is sort of, well, everything in between the two, really.
Okay.
Whereas the master will affect all three channels. So that would just make the whole lot brighter or not.
Right.
So the right-hand side of these color wheels is the exposure. The left-hand side of these color wheels is the saturation.
Okay.
So if I wanted to desaturate the whole of the image, I would use the master wheel, and I could drag this all the way down, and now you have a black and white
nice.
image. Or I could pump it all the way up and you have a horrible over-saturated image. Let's say I wanted to just add a bit more saturation to the midtones. I could pump a bit more saturation in there, so it's kind of more like your skin and it tends to live in that vibe.
Yeah.
Now you can see this is where the vector scope comes into play a lot more. However the far the line goes out in a given direction towards the edge of the wheel, that shows the amount of saturation that it has in that direction of colour.
Right, okay, makes sense, yeah.
So if I crank the saturation up on the master in every direction, you'll see that everything goes out, and there's quite a lot of blue in the image. So the bluey sort of cyany area of the vector scope gets quite populated. I reset that, obviously it looks horrendous. I think that your skin looks a bit too green.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So skin tends to live in the midtones. Let's click and drag this and see what it does. So you can see you can affect all of the colours in that given area, and you can push or pull them away from different colours and go into other colour spaces. So if I thought you were a bit too green, which is down here,
Yeah.
I'd probably want to push it away up
Opposite
into, yeah,
colour.
so push it up there a bit. I mean, when you start going too far, obviously it looks incorrect. But if I started pushing the image up a bit that way, you really don't need much on these.
No, less is more.
Absolutely less is more. It's very subtle. And then I would keep jumping backwards and forwards to see, like, how does it look? I might give the whole image a little bit more exposure. I think we've kind of got a good basis. I think our image is color matched. It doesn't, when you play it through, it doesn't look particularly jarring or weird.
No, it looks like it's one part, it's part of the same clip, which is what you want, obviously.
Absolutely. But I think we've gone well. We've got a nice sequence here where we've color matched.
Yes.
Now it's time to do color grading. Now, color grading, you tend to use a lot of the same tools that we just looked at. You can use the color wheels. You can push color into the shadows, or you can kind of like change the saturation. You can also use color curves, which we'll have a look at in a second.
Okay.
That allows you to kind of do things like give the shadows more of like a vintage style roll off, where you have like these lifted shadows and stuff that seems to be very popular at the moment. We can look at those. And then finally, we'll add some creative LUTs as well, because that's really where the fun begins.
Yeah.
So let's go back to our adjustment layer, and I'm going to use I think I'm going to use this as like my hero shot, somewhere around here, because it's got skin tones in it. Skin tones, I think, are the most important thing to get correct, because it's something that, well, everyone knows what people look like.
Yeah.
If you get it wrong, it's very obvious you've got it wrong. Whereas an inanimate object, it could be any colour, it could be anything. A person looks like, we know if that looks weird. If you've got bright pink skin, it's clearly incorrect.
Yeah.
This already, to be fair, I think is looking like a really nice image. But let's just see what we can do. If I go back to my stack of effects, you can see now we've got our LUTs, which was our technical LUT. Then we've made some adjustments on the colour wheels. You can toggle the whole adjustment layer on and off by pressing V, so you can see how far you've come so far.
Yeah.
And much like all the audio effects and other effects within Final Cut Pro, the order of them cascades down, so top to bottom.
Okay.
So you tend to want to have your technical LUT first, any other little tweaks you need, a creative LUT, maybe you want your creative LUT straight away, then do your little tweaks, and then any kind of additional sharpening or vignetting that normally happens right at the end.
Right, okay.
Okay, so we're going to add another LUT. So I'm going to go back to the effects thing. I'm going to go for MLUT and I'm going to drag it onto my adjustment layer again. And now if we show this is where we can go to say load a custom LUT, and we can start browsing LUTs that we've purchased or you can download for free.
So does the MLUT package come with some LUTs with it, or do you have to download them separately?
It does come with some, I believe, yeah. There's free, which I think is what it comes with, and you can just click on them and start having a look. Like that's made you very orange, that's made you very tealy and orange. So I'm going to go into MLUT and I'm going to click on MLUT presets. Now these are currently being loaded in at 100% strength, which may be a bit strong. A lot of the people that sell LUTs, they kind of recommend that you dial it in at around 50 to 60%,
okay,
and you can kind of tweak it to whatever you think looks best, that works with your footage. So we're browsing these at the moment at 100%, so these might look a bit weird to begin with. But I'm going to have a look at some LUTs by Daniel Schiffer, and I like his thrift shop LUT, so we can have a look at that. Now that looks pretty cool.
Yeah, that makes a lot of difference already.
That's quite punchy. And again, the great thing I like about MLUTs is you can just really effortlessly kind of click around and get an idea of what it is that your project would look like. I mean, that looks pretty good too. Chopper looks all right, but I think we'll go with thrift shop.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we've added a LUT, and now that we've added the LUT, we get a bit more control. So like I say, we can dial in the intensity of the LUT. We can take it all the way back to 0, which is how it was out of the box. Now that would look like a really good image a minute ago. Now I think again it looks a little bit plain.
Yeah.
I think that LUT was definitely doing something. But you might not want it 100%. You might want it about 50 to 60%. Let's go for 65%.
Okay.
Okay, so it works with that shot. Let's have a look across at some of the other shots. Because now what we thought was good in terms of exposure previously, it might be looking a bit off now potentially. I think that's adding something. That's looking pretty good. It's a subtle improvement.
But you could always go back a step to the colour correction.
Absolutely. You could change the technical. You might get to the creative LUT and go, yeah, that's good. But then you can go and change the technical LUT right at the beginning, and it may add something whole new. It's experimentation at this stage. If you don't know entirely what you're doing, experiment. Yep. But my advice would be to not overdo it. So I'm clicking through and I'm looking at these. I think that looks like a good shot. That looks nice. Let's just get this out of the way a little bit. So as a get-go, I think that looks pretty smart, yeah?
Yeah.
Maybe we might want to add a little bit more raised shadows to it just for the sake of this, just to give it that real vintage vibe. So we can do that by introducing the colour curves.
Oh yeah, I mentioned these earlier, didn't you?
Yes. So if I click on here and I say I want to add some colour curves, that's now going to stack another effect at the very end of so after it's processed all the previous ones, it will add a new one. So you have colour curves, and this is a representation of dark to light, so dark on the very left, light on the very right. This Luma one affects the whole image, and then much like the RGB parade on the left here, you can affect just the red channel, just the green channel, just the blue channel. If you had, for example, like your hair is quite blue.
I'm glad you said blue there.
Blue. You can do stuff with this blue channel to affect the colour of, like, you can make it horrendous, which is like, that looks a bit like our
intro video.
Yeah. But if we reset that, let's start by adding some points. So this is going all the way up the kind of exposure value. So down here, like I say, this is your lower, this is your shadows.
Okay.
So if I start adding some points along this chart, the more points you have, the more granular you can be. So we've added our points. And now you can start to see how this curve will affect the image. So if I were to start to drag this up and say, so this is the darkest of the dark blacks.
Right, okay.
And you can say, I want to limit it so that colour, it's like a threshold basically for that colour. So whatever lives at this value actually raise the luminosity of it. So what you're doing here is, if there was a cut, this is just before you're hitting black here.
Yeah.
You're actually saying make that darker, like you see, it's really crunching it, or make it a lot lighter, and you can really push up. So look how light I can make all the bits that were really quite dark. So that obviously looks horrendous. But what you can do is you can start to give it a little bit of a fade. So just a little bit.
Oh, you can see it.
Yeah, and that is quite a creative look. And some people also seem to like to just let the highlights roll off a little bit as well. Like, don't let them hit pure white. Kind of flatten the curve out a little bit. It's quite a vintage sort of style. You can go quite aggressive with it if you really wanted to. I don't particularly like it. I think it looks a bit meh. But if we gave it a little bit, just a little bit, let's reset the whole lot. Let's add a couple more points. And maybe we'll just lift it a tiny bit. Just a bit.
I know we said this a few times, but it really is a case of less is more with all of this, because when you start piling on your colour corrections, your LUTs, and then your curves, little changes make such a big difference. And there's no right or wrong answer.
There is no right or wrong answer. It's a very creative process, and it identifies you as a videographer. That becomes your style.
Well, you also find as well, as time goes on, your tastes and your styles change.
Yeah.
Some of our earlier videos are styled a lot all different to how our current ones are.
So whilst we said there's no right or wrong answers, there are a couple of other little things you can do along with the scopes to help you work out, have you got your colour grade correct or not? Now, one of the things that I like to do is to include a draw mask with my adjustment layer. So if I come back over to the effects, and I'm going to search for draw mask, and I'm just going to drag the draw mask onto the adjustment layer, and I want that to be my last effect. So let's just collapse all of these. Here's my draw mask, and I'm going to just draw on Neil's head. There we go. Now that I'm on my draw mask, I've isolated a patch of skin. You can see over here on the vector scopes, let's just zoom in a little. Okay, you can see where this is called the skin line, or the flesh line, I've heard it called. I don't really like that phrase.
Flesh.
No matter your ethnicity or race or your hue, or whether you're black or white or whatever, your skin should reside on this line here.
Okay.
Ideally. I mean, there's going to be times when it doesn't. If you're deliberately shooting someone in a very cold environment or dark environment, it won't always work. But in general, it should be roughly there. If it smiles in the other direction, you've gone horribly wrong.
Right.
But here you can see Neil's skin, and if anything, it's a little bit too red.
Yeah.
This is open to creative interpretation. I could maybe change the sample to be down here. That's a lot closer to where it needs to be. Okay. This is still saying perhaps it's a little too red. So what you could do is you could add let's add another color wheels. Right, so that's this one here, and I'm going to move it to be the thing that happens just before the draw mask. So let's just turn the draw mask off. So that's our image. This is our color wheels.
Okay.
Made it bad. If we go and edit this color wheels information, in fact, let's turn our draw mask back on. I'm going to reset our color wheels. So this is saying, if anything, we want to be a little bit more kind of towards the yellow. So what we could do is we could use temperature. So as I drag this around, you can see your skin changing colour wildly under there. Right. But if I drag this all the way to the left and it's very purple, you can see it's miles off of your magenta line there. So ideally, I mean, if you were going for it, you'd be dragging it to like There, that's perfectly on the skin line apparently. But that looks a bit too warm to me. Let's have a look. It's not too bad.
No.
How do you think?
I think that's pretty good actually.
It's warmed it up a little bit.
Yeah, it has, yeah.
Like I said, you don't have to stick to anything religiously. It's up to you. I personally think that's a little too warm. So I'm going to just tweak it a little. I'm going to bring it down. And do it by eye. Because it was a cold day. I'm going to be about there. But I'm happy with that. So now you can add your final bits and bobs. And this isn't technically colour grading, but this is just kind of finishing.
So this is like your sharpening.
Yeah, so
vignettes.
maybe we'll add a tiny bit of sharpening. And then maybe a vignette just to finish things off. Because I think a vignette always looks pretty nice, right?
Yes.
Not that much though. Let's turn that down a bit. I want a very subtle vignette. Very subtle. Just creeping in. So I think we're done. Let's have a look at the before. I'm just going to turn this adjustment layer off.
Okay.
Very flat.
Yeah.
Very loggy as you'd expect. Now let's have a look at the after.
Oh wow, yeah, you can really see the difference.
So there we have it, guys. That's how we do our colour grading in Final Cut Pro. Hopefully that was helpful. I think very much a less is more approach
Definitely
seems to be the way forward. It's very obvious when somebody's kind of starting out and they're really cranking everything up or putting crazy LUTs on things and they think, oh, it looks amazing.
A bit like some of my earlier videos.
Absolutely, we're entirely guilty of it. Everybody goes through it. But this is your chance. This is your chance to kind of put your creativity. This is how your videos become your style based on your grade. So everything we said here is just kind of a hint to how you can achieve what it is that you want to go away and achieve with your footage.
Well, hope you found it helpful. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe down below. And hit that little bell icon too, so you're notified of our next release.
Absolutely. And we'll catch you in the next one.
See you in the next one.